Welcome to NightLight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is NightLight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody, to NightLight. This is our final show with Gary Wayne. It's on section 8 of his book, Genesis. There's Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and it's been an adventure and an educational adventure for me. I think I've learned more about the book than I did in the 3 or 4 times that I read it all the way through. Going through it section by section has been an amazing adventure, and certainly I've gained greater insight into so much of this book. It's unbelievable, and am looking forward to book 3. So, somewhere in the not too distant future, we'll have Gary back for going into that, but I'm pretty sure we'll have him back again because, it's hard to not have a dose of Gary Wayne every couple of months just to keep us on our toes. So welcome to the show, Gary. I'm so glad that, we've made it through without, so far, knock on wood, no major issues. And this has been such an amazing adventure in going through your book section by section because I've learned so much more.
Well, that's one of the unique things about my books is that if you read it once, you get a lot of information. If you read it twice, you get even more information. And seemingly any time that you go back and read it again, you pick up things and connect more things that you just didn't quite sort of see or get your head around in the first number of reads. So I was always astonished myself because it's such a large book, it's hard to remember everything that's in the book. So every time I had to proofread it or read it over, and all through the process of writing and editing, and then afterwards again, I'd get into parts where I think I forgot all about that. I can't remember that I did that. It's just so much information that's there, and so it's not one that I certainly don't want to recommend to my people that they read it, endlessly. But the second and third reads are very, very helpful to getting the whole connection to how everything is connected and seeing the whole picture.
Well, I think not only that, but for me, getting familiar with the vocabulary helped tremendously because, you're talking not only these people from the Bible that have a name they're born with and they change it, then God gives them another name so that, you have people that have, it's like Barbara /May /DeLong /whatever. And you have to, it helps to understand what's going on. And especially with your 2 different bloodlines that have many of the same names in them, it's tough it was tough for me at first now I'm a little bit better with it, but each of the bloodlines had an Enoch, and Methuselah looked very much the same, and it's kind of, it makes you more aware of the different bloodlines and the different characters and why they named each other, that why they used the same names, I don't know, because there were plenty of names out there they could have chosen.
Yeah, it's that one is certainly up for grabs. So, and what I note early on in the book in terms of the lineage of Cain and the lineage of Adam and through Seth to Noah, is that each of the parties, monotheist and polytheist, suggests that the other group copied their names or mimicked their names, and that there was a designation in there done that way to create sort of confusion or to conflate the two bloodlines. But understanding that there's bloodlines that have been with us since the creation of the Adamites, and that when we read anything in history or we read anything in the Bible, we need to go right to the beginning of Genesis, where we have the two bloodlines of Cain and Seth, and then you have an introduction of a different hybrid race by the fallen angels. And two of those bloodlines sort of intermarry in significant ways, although there's some marriage into the Scythian line as well. But bloodlines right from Genesis 1 to Genesis 6, that's the main takeaway, or one of the main takeaways that people need to have if they're going to read the Bible and if they're going to read history.
Well, if you look at it that way, don't all of us on the planet at this moment in time come from one of those bloodlines?
Well, certainly from the Noah line from Seth. I mean, that's going to be woven through most everybody on the earth for sure, because unless you ascribe survivors to the Cainite line, which is a possibility, at least according to the polytheist accountings. So you might have some other bloodlines there if that were the case. So there could be a few more than what people think. And then you have all the different bloodlines of the giants. But if you just do the three groupings, you'd have a significant sort of intermarry with the ones that are loyal to the royal bloodlines, to the bloodlines of the giants, whereas the other ones would be less wanting to intermarry. But again, if you see what happens early on in the post-Diluvian world, Abraham is pulled out, one individual and his family, and they're going to start a whole new nation that's not intermarrying with these giants. So just with that understanding, there's a significant intermixing of the genes and the bloodlines all around the world, because everybody from Babel, at the time of the confusing of the languages, were dispersed around the world, and they went to live amongst the giants, who are the aboriginals in all of the lands after the flood. And for people wondering how that sort of makes any sense, is the Babel Tower and the confusion of the languages is circa 101 years after the flood. And so you have 100 years where giants show up after the flood, whether it's through second incursion, through survival, or both. And so, yes, there's going to be significant intermixing, but not to the level that people think, because it doesn't manifest in the genes and the genealogies according to the royals and the polytheists, and it doesn't manifest in their sacred blood type, so to speak, of the royals, which tends to be the Rh negative, and O negative being the most sort of golden, if you could put it that in those sort of terms, and they kind of do in a lot of their allegory. But it is not as common, because you have only about 15% of the world's population with Rh negative blood. Now, we don't have proof positive that is the gene that's coming from the giants, but polytheists who track those genealogies say it is. So we can take them at face value, or just say, well, whether it's true or it's not true, it's what they do with that belief system that we need to be aware of, and that's really the key case.
I think one of the important things, too, to realize is when you call them Aborigines and stuff like that, these giants were not the stupid, bumbling, drooling giants that we see through history and some of our fables and things like that. These were very intelligent people.
Yeah, highly, highly intelligent people, but also hubris and narcissistic, and with the perpetual sort of war gene to go with it. So diabolical would be probably a better word, as they became corrupted for sure. And that when we look at surveys, and in book one, I didn't really nail down Rh negative as being it. I think it is, but it's that absolute sort of proof that we didn't have, that I didn't want to put it in there. But I'm pointing in that direction all the way through, and I talk a little bit more about it in book two. But when I was doing surveys on it, when I was doing my research, and there's lots of surveys out there, so they're all kind of similar, but I just sort of put some of the commonalities together for the highest level of commonality between surveys on Rh negative people. But here's a list of some significant traits. Number one on the list is higher intelligence, IQ of 135 plus. And so that goes exactly to what you're saying. So it's the wisdom, though, that they didn't seem to want to develop along with the intelligence and along with the knowledge that they had and the technology that they had, but better analytical skills, better intuitive abilities, more psychic abilities, larger heads and eyes. Well, that makes sense, especially with those cone heads, but lower body temperature, so kind of a more connection more to reptilian perhaps, lower blood pressure, which is kind of interesting. Higher percentages of blonde and red hair, and higher percentages of blue and green or hazel eyes. Better vision and other improved senses. So 2015 would be not uncommon or even better amongst Rh negative, at least when people are young, for the eyesight. An increased sensitivity to light and subject to more alien abductions and unexplained phenomena, like with ghosts and demons and stuff like that. And this is the one that I just sort of stood out to me, and I put it sort of right at the end of the list. And they believe for some reason they can't be cloned.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So again, it's sort of part of that, and it's more intuitive. It's not just the royales; it's people who have Rh negative tend to think that, on the whole, not 100%, but on a large majority on those surveys, believe that. So, however they come about that belief system, through their parents, through just sort of an intuitive sense, not sure. That's just sort of showed up, and I thought that is absolutely mind-boggling.
It is. It's almost, it goes along with, long time ago, NASA did a survey of people who they called star children. And those qualities were right along with all of the other qualities they came up with. And it was kind of fascinating. It's somewhere, I'll send you the list of the star qualities, because it goes into greater depth than what you did. But NASA identified people who were different, and it wasn't just Rh negative. That may have been one of them, but there were a whole bunch of other aspects that were very interesting that flow right along with what you're saying. Almost kind of like feeling that this was not their home; they belonged somewhere else. That there was something else going on in the way. I'll send you the list.
Yeah, I'll add it to my research.
Okay.
because it's circumstantial evidence, but it just adds to the whole understanding that there's a different race that's involved here, whether or not you want to look at them from other planets, or you want to look at it as different creations that were made for this planet, there's a distinction that people can feel. And I think it's something that answers a lot of questions. And star people, I mean, that's, typically understood either as aliens, but, the angels and fallen angels are called stars allegorically, and they're represented by stars. So when we look at the alien mythos, it is telling the same story. All that's happening is they're just degrading what I would call all of the other beings down to a spurious offspring sort of level. So even the gods or the fallen angels, as we would understand that in the Bible, they would just put them at the more technologically advanced of these physically originating beings in the physical universe, except that angels, fallen or loyal, didn't originate in the physical world. They were created before heaven and earth. They are of the spirit realm. They are spirit beings who can take a physical form. And so when I look at research done on the History Channel and all sorts of aspects of, as I get into it, and particularly with the ancient alien mythos, I love watching that research. I understand the lens that they're looking through it through, but it is just testifying to everything, just with a lowering of the types of beings to aliens in spaceships that come and did everything that the gods were said to do in all of the histories around the world. So it's just more of a matter of perspective, and everybody's looking at the same history. And even if you get into, let's say, Graham Hancock, who isn't a fan of giants and doesn't want to sort of consider that in there, he's talking about everything else around it that they were involved in. But he's also pointing to this history has been hidden to us. So whether or not it's hiding, whether or not aliens have been with us all the way through, or the hidden history within the Bible that doesn't get taught, the hidden history of the giants and their bloodlines that's controlled by the upper echelons of society, all of it is talking about the same events and just nuances with the lens in terms of how certain things would be interpreted, but it's the same events.
Wow. Well, it does make one wonder when you get right down to it. Where do we come from? Are we indigenous to this planet? And it's really funny because so many people have said to me, well, humans aren't indigenous, and I'm beginning to agree with that we really did not evolve from a single cell, that we were transplanted here. And, fully formed Homo sapiens sapiens. And that feels to me at this moment in time more logical than, the fact that we evolved and we went through all of this. And it's science's way of explaining how we came to be here. I think we came through interdimensional portals at some point. And that's what this sounds like.
Well, certainly the angels came through interdimensional portals. From a biblical perspective, we don't get that we would have arrived here from another planet. We're told biblically that we're created on the earth, but we're also told there's beings that were created elsewhere in another dimension who are crisscrossing. And so, again, it's just sort of looking at the events. Was the humans developed, as in some of the alien mythos, in several different tries to get us to where we were? Or was there the creations in day 6 and with the Adamites that I would say are two different ones that were created sort of instantaneously and completely distinct from most of the other beings, except for the Nahash being, which is the serpent that was also created in day 6, that ends up deceiving Adam and Eve in Eden, another intelligent being that we don't have, or at least if we do, it's part of the hierarchy of the visible ones that were saved by the fallen angels. And what's also interesting is that when I look at the wisdom of the world, it's one thing that we're taught to be very careful of in the Bible. And I'm not saying to dismiss it, but we need to be careful with the wisdom of the world because it has been corrupted like everything else in this world. And there's an interesting analogous story to the angelic rebellion and the coming to the earth that's in the fairy lore, which is all part of some of the things that we're going to be talking about probably tonight. And in chapter 13, I cover this off in Satan's first revenge, or Satan's revenge, and I talk about the first and the second revenge. And the first revenge happens in Eden. And in that story, there's an analogous fairy mythos that I start to introduce at the beginning of in section 1. And it's a fairy mythos. They have an accounting of the proud fairy that came from other planets, along with ones who followed them that had rebelled from the other fairies, and they settled on this earth. And so in that, you see almost like a merging of some of the things that we see with the wisdom of the world out there, that you have coming from another planet or as in aliens, but we also know that these are interdimensional beings as well. So was that another planet or was that another location in another dimension that they come from? It's not super clear. And these were the opalescent beings who created their offspring, which were the shining ones. And in this case, in the fairy lore, it's the Tuatha de Denaan, and the giants of Ireland, the giants of Norway and Sweden, the giants of Germany, the giants of Atlantis, the giants of Russia, and all throughout the Covenant land and elsewhere. But it's just so interesting that you have, even in that accounting, it's a proud angel who rebelled and those who followed them that come to the earth that create this other race. And it's on this planet that that race is created, and it's from amongst people who were already here and already created in this earth. So it's an interesting sort of parallel, and just sort of mixes in to all of these allegories and the bloodlines and the different beings that we've seen both before the flood and then again after the flood.
So the opalescents and the shining ones were another race from the angelic realm, or are they? The opalescent ones are the angels or the gods. The shining ones who shine but not as brilliant as the opalescent ones are the offspring, which are the giants. And from the shiningness, the whole opalescent spiritual being, even if they took a physical form, which they did to create offspring and to walk amongst us, that would have glowed from a whole body scenario. So when we hear of references to these shining angels in the Bible, it would be sort of akin to that. The giants, their eyes shone, and it would light up a complete room. So they would shine in that sort of way. And some of them, even in other accounts, even their sort of head shined with sort of a halo. There was that sort of not ethos, but that atmosphere around the face of light that shone them. So two levels of shiningness. One, maybe the eyes are later in time and maybe after the flood, and maybe that whole halo look or that orb of light around their head is more antediluvian. But there are distinctions in how much the giants shone. But both before and after the flood, the physical giants or shining ones, and that the opalescent beings are understood as the parents or the gods or the fallen angels, and they could be in spirit form, and they could also take a physical form. Then that makes Noah a giant. Because when he was born, he shone.
Only if you read part of the narrative in the book of Enoch. So when his father sees that he's shining like an offspring of the fallen angels, like a giant, he goes running to Enoch to say, have somehow I have been a father to a giant is basically the question, and how could this be? And Enoch assures them that this is not a giant. And so he would be shining if that is accurate in the book of Enoch, and I have nothing to suggest that it isn't accurate. But it doesn't say he's a giant. It just says he shone like a giant. And so he was sent on a specific mission to humankind, and he's going to fulfill a commission and to warn the earth in his commission and to try and get them to repent from things, or the flood's going to come. And he builds the ark along with his sons, and he is pure of spirit and he is pure of DNA, just as his sons are, and just as one deduces the unnamed wives are. So he would have the intelligence, he would have communication with God, he walked with God, he was unique in the earth, but he was not classified as a giant, but he did shine like one. So maybe that's a special blessing or a power that he had. And the other thing that we're not told as the story unfolds, both in the book of Enoch and in the Bible with Noah, is we're not told he's a shining one when he's an adult. Maybe it just shone as a sign of, this is going to be one of my representatives, and he's going to have my authority, and he's going to fulfill and do things that no other human can understand. And we don't know whether or not he might have had some sort of connection or communication with God, either in the womb or after the womb. And the reason why I say that, we get an account in the time of the Exodus with Moses, after a long session with God. He comes out and his head is shining. He's like a shining one. But that would be because of that interaction with God. So if I was looking for a biblical answer, that if that indeed happened, and again, we don't get that accounting in the Bible, but again, I don't have any reason to dismiss the accuracy of that part, is that we have another parallel story that would explain how that shining of the baby Noah would come about.
Okay, just curious, because, being shining seems to be a dead giveaway that there's something awry here.
It is, and I always point to people in there, just make sure you read the whole narrative, because the whole narrative, after you get the answer, Lamech is absolutely assured it's his son. It's come from him and his wife, but this is somebody who is going to carry out God's and is there to be and he maybe even be reinforced with strength that we don't know about, because he's going to walk into these nations of giants and then try and convince them to repent. And they're going to attack them. They're going to run them out. They just are not going to be welcomed by open arms by the giants, nor the other humans in the Antediluvian epoch. Whatever Noah is saying, they don't want to hear. And not all of those people were giants either, but just the numbers of the people that he would have been up against, that in the last 100 years of that age, it would be just absolutely incredible. And he had to escape just because away from them, because of his life continually being threatened.
Well, and there in some of the books that I've read, it suggests that there were angels that helped him to build the ark. So that would, if that was the case, then that would, explain why perhaps either one hid away or hung to the side. I mean, it seems
Sure.
that in some way he helped the giants to survive the flood, at least some of them.
Well, certainly in the book of Enoch, it says that the angels helped build the ark, but biblically that's not what we're told. So the problem with the Book of Enoch is even though I like it a lot, and it probably runs 99% consistent directionally with the Bible, it has a few corruptions. That would be another one. It has Enoch that is said to be 500 years old. And it's supposed to be Enoch, son of Jared, not Enoch, son of Cain. Well, Enoch was taken to heaven at age 365. So this is clearly a corruption or a change, I would say probably the same way, or an error made down through history on the age and a few other details. And I have a document on this where people want to know what some of the differences are that I picked up. Those, get a hold of me. I'll send you that document. I'm not saying to throw the Book of Enoch away because, as I say, I like it a lot. I use it a lot because it's so directionally consistently, except for the corruptions. The problem with the Book of Enoch is we do not have a complete Hebrew manuscript for it, only some small fragments. So all of the ones we have are from not necessarily reliable sources. So the oldest version, and the one that I prefer, is the Giaz version out of Ethiopia, that came down through the Queen of Sheba as received to her from Solomon. The other one that is most commonly used in the last 100, just under 100 years is from the Dead Sea Scrolls discoveries, and this is the Aramaic version, but again, not in Hebrew, and it's a little bit shorter, and it has a couple differences in it than the one in Ethiopia. Then you have a Greek versions of this that are more corrupted compared to the Giaz and the Aramaic versions, and then you have some Slavonic ones as well. So, but the issue is we don't have the original Hebrew. Now we know a lot of it we can take back to Hebrew words, which is goes to its veracity, and we're not sure when or how some of the corruptions came about. Another classic example is what I would say is the separation of Azazel and Shemiyaza into two different angels. They seem to have the same roles in the Book of Enoch, but for some reasons in the translations they've been separated. And Shemiyaza doesn't have an EL on the end, and typically the angels will have an EL on the end, or they're using another title or a name, likely from another language or for a different purpose. So, we even get another name that's likely for Satan in the Book of Enoch as the one who was in Eden, and that would have been in Satan's cherubic form, which is Gadrael, and we can take that back to Hebrew. It means God's wall or wall of God. But Shemiyaza is seemingly made up of two words and more of a title that was likely associated with Azazel, and that Shem is the first word, and that is the shortened version of Shema or Shemaim for the plural, so like a heavenly one, and or as it is used for the name Shem, and as it's rooted in the men of renown in Genesis 6:4, which means famous or infamous. So again, he could be a famous or an infamous heavenly one, which would be Azazel, who's the chief of the Watchers. And then you have the word Yaza, which is an Aramaic word and a Zen word, both meaning for an angel and a god. So again, it seems to be sort of attached on. And if it was not that as that root for the Yaza meaning, is you have AZA, that's part of the Azazel name, in at the end. So all the words that are in there, and the meanings that are in there, go back to Azazel, and Az and Azaz are two separate words, and it's words that are also associated with goat as it comes down through the Hebrew etymology. But in the beginning, it means strong and stout and powerful, just as Azazel was the warrior god angel of the Antediluvian epoch and the leader of the Watchers. So both words suggest the same angel, but again, another corruption.
Is there any connection to the fact that early on Egypt was called the land of Khem? Does that have any relation to possibly Shem and then the land of Khem, which would be, Egypt?
Yeah, no, I don't think so, because Khem and Mendes sort of go together, and so you're getting back into words that means basically dark, as opposed to Shem, which could be translated in one of two ways. And Khem is also associated with goat. As in the Khem of Capricorn, or the goat of Capricorn. And Mendes is again sort of associated with dark and with knowledge and magic as well. So no, I wouldn't take Khem, because I don't have a way of getting in any of the different sort of fancy words that they use for how words get transliterated into other languages, a substitution of a KH for an SH. And I don't have a K as an S, but I could go to Indo-Aryan and look at it just to sort of run the gamut of the argument as I'm thinking on my feet here. If you look at the word CERN, C-E-R-N, that's an Indo-Aryan word that could also be spelled K-E-R-N and pronounced Kern and CERN. It comes down pronounced both ways. Basically means a horned god, as in the goat god Azazel, which is another interesting sort of connection. But you don't get it with a K-H in there. And if it was a C-H in the Indo-Aryans, which you don't get as well, that was usually not pronounced as a hard K. It would have been pronounced as an H. So, as we see that show up into Hebrew, you have Horim, which is spelled H-O-R-I-M, but in transliterated out of Hebrew, it would be C-H-O-R-I-M. So I've looked at that in a lot of ways when I did that research, but I could never get an etymological connection to Shem. But I was looking for it. I have to admit that.
No, they just feel so close. It just seems like there might have been a connection. But if not, that's okay.
Well, not that I found, but I suspected there might be. But I just couldn't really get there, so I didn't want to speculate on it.
Well, hey. I can certainly understand that. I think, how you've woven your material together and bring it all, you pull it up into such a nice package at the very end. It's amazing how you did it. This is definitely a masterful work of art. It feels, every time I pass over the Tuatha Denaan and of course the bloodline of the Fairies and the Grail and Atlantis, it all kind of feels sort of magical. It's as if a lot of our allegories, a lot of our fairy tales and everything are trying to preserve a history that we're not paying attention to.
And they were designed that to last through the ages, that those imageries of those allegories would go forward and be woven into the culture. And it's a living history and genealogy that we're living immersed in, not just this generation, but all the generations that came before. And it's important to discern what that information is, so that we can better understand what's being communicated, because it shows up in the literature. It shows up in our history in references that you don't really make connections to, but particularly as that format of the allegory goes into literature. And, we've had the great classics out of Greek history. And that's a very ancient form of the same form of writing that Shakespeare did and what Lewis and Tolkien did in the mythopoetic version with the latter. And the characters and the names and the locations and the events, for the most part, are the history, but there's a fiction fairy tale woven in it to tell that story. And all the names, all the locations, specific words that are used, these are all for those who have been taught the mysteries and are adepts. And the higher you go on the adept level, the deeper you can go into the meaning of the story that's being told. And it has a sort of a happy ever after ending in all these fairy tales, right? And that's what Tolkien and Lewis, knowing absolute experts on this type of craft and were taught in that craft, even though they had the knowledge themselves, they called it a eucatastrophe, where the hero who should have faced a terrible end did not. There was a happy, ever-ending end to the story to have people walk away feeling good about the story, and so that the message wouldn't get lost. But really, in fact, because that's the fairy tale, it's a superficial, interesting narrative, the hero didn't survive. And in their belief system, the ancient heroes, which were giants, just as they're called heroes in Sumerian history, like Gilgamesh and his father, and the hero stories of the giants of Uruk, or heroes in Greek mythologies, they suffered horrible deaths. And that's not the happily ever after ending. And so it's an art form that they do it all. And it's one of the ways that they will convince us in the end time that the Bible is a fairy tale. And you have to understand it interpretively, and only they can tell you how it should mean, and that Jesus didn't really resurrect. That is the eucatastrophe of the fairy tale that was written into the New Testament story.
Well, look at grim fairy tales. I mean, they are grim. There's, they're giving you a lesson, but they're not happy lessons at all.
And within all of the fairy tales, you see on display the classic visible dualism of the white hats and the dark hats, the white magic and the black magic, the good heroes and the evil heroes, and the good bloodlines and the bad bloodlines, the good witches and evil witches, the good wizards and the evil wizards. It's just a constant in that type of literature that. And you can go look back even right into the Greek history with the classics. Hercules was doing a romp through the ancient world, killing off all of the evil giants. And then you had all of these wars between the giants and kingdoms.
But then, yes, and maybe that's why we're always looking for the good guy and the bad guy. And today, it's hard to tell. I mean, we're so used to having a good guy and a bad guy, and the good guy always wins. But today, it's very hard to pick out.
They've mired that whole concept, yes, in the storytelling in the last, 40 years or so. I agree with that, and there's a purpose for that, I think.
What, to confuse us? They succeeded.
I think it's preparation for the end time, that whether it's the white hats or the dark hats, they're all working towards the same agenda. So whether or not you're showing, let's say, a police story and a criminal story, the police are as corrupt as the crooks. They worship the same pantheon, right? There's not any real difference. There's not any real difference between the mafia godfathers and the nobility. They're both initiatory societies and they're bloodline families. One is supposedly out there doing more good. The other one works in the dark spaces and does evil to humans. And it's always been used to cattle herd humankind into a specific sort of direction. And a war that was going on between which side would have control in terms of how they got there, but they all want to get to the same goal. And we see it play out in every sort of aspect of it. So even in our politics and we're living in a unique time right now where we're seeing the established political parties sort of have things sort of ripped off from the scabs, and we get a look at all of the mung corruption and things that are in underneath. And what I mean by that is it's that uniparty thing where you would have the establishment of the Democratic Party and the establishment of the Republican Party, and they had, they sort of split the country into two, and they played to the biases of each, but they have the same agenda. And depending on which side you're on, which is the good side and which is the bad side.
Well, yeah.
But lately we have a populist movement that's out there that's saying both of those are bad, and we should discard that because they're just there to control us.
Well, and you look at the wars that are going on now, and you see one attacking another, and you think that's horrible, and yet you go in and you speak to not the politicians and not the armies, but the people who are being brutalized by this experience, this situation. And from their standpoint, everybody's the bad guy because they just wanted to live a peaceful life. So depending on what your perspective is, it gives you a different perspective of who the bad guys are. Frankly, if somebody bombed me, I don't care who they were, they're the bad guy. But
Yep.
They might be in their perspective, they're trying to save this bunch of people that I'm a part of from something that I don't know is bad for me. So everybody thinks they're the good guys. That's the problem. Everybody thinks they're the good guys.
Yep. And, the Germans in World War II, up to probably a certain point, and I would think there would have been a big erosion, but at the beginning they thought, Hitler was good for them. And they had no idea where he was going to take them. But they also felt that they had been harmed by World War I. And so World War II is actually the same war. It's just the second act to the war. And that they're just saying, we've been horribly dealt with. We are living in poverty. And finally, there's somebody who's going to give us our pride back. And now we're going to take our land back. And then we're going to do a little bit more. And then they turned it into a cult.
Yeah.
And then it really got out of control. But so you can see how people can get seduced with that type of movement. But at the same time, it was what was done to the Germans that put them into such a vulnerable situation on that. And it's always things that we have to be aware of, and that we need leaders to step up to challenge the bloodline control, but we have to make sure we're not going to, establish a sort of a strongman antichrist wannabe, as in what, Adolf Hitler was.
Well, it's so hard to tell. I mean, because look at even Taiwan. Taiwan was originally a part of China. I can understand China wanting their land back. But at the same time, Taiwan has had its independence and it doesn't want to go back. But so depending on how you look at it, they're both good guys and they're both bad guys.
Yeah, depending on which side of the fence you're on. And all of the... most of the nobility and the bloodlines escaped to Taiwan with the rise of communism. And so now you have a little bit more to it with the class side of it as well. And if you ever traveled through Taiwan and China, and particularly in Taiwan, they would ask for comparisons. So, do you think our tea is better? Do you think our food is better? Do you think our cities are cleaner? There's this class thing that's absolutely active that goes on with that. I'm not there to pass a judgment on it because of the history, but there's definitely the two sides think that they're different sides of the same people, that's for sure.
Well, this is very reminiscent of a Star Trek episode where these two entities were exactly the same, except they were black and white on different sides. And they have been battling throughout time as to who is the strongest, who is the best, who is whatever. And don't you think that's sort of what's going on here? Everybody thinks they're right, and from the other guy's perspective, they're right and we're wrong. And
yeah, I would say so from a limited perspective of what they were showing in that show. It was a terrific allegory. Remember, these were also interdimensional travelers.
Yeah.
And that in the dualistic polytheist belief system, you have God and the leader of the polytheist side, and from a monotheist perspective, we would know that as Satan, as being equal, and that it's this perpetual war that one side gets the upper hand for a small time, then the other side gets the upper hand for a small period of time, but it never ends. It just always continues. And there's cycles in that, but it just always continues. So I think their allegory that they were doing in that one actually has even more of the belief system that's put in there. But part of that belief system is what happens in their heaven, which is Hades or Sheol, also happens on earth. So when they have that saying, so above, so below, just understand that their heaven is in Sheol or Hades, which is below in the earth and in another dimension versus above.
And you wonder, no matter where you are, if you really know where you are.
Well, and that's just it. We don't know.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah, we were created with very little knowledge, and which makes us easily deceived, but the reward is greater than being created immortal like the angels were, because if we choose correctly, at least from a monotheist perspective, then we will be raised higher than the angels and will become the inheritors of eternity, and we'll have an opportunity to judge those fallen angels who did such horrible things to us.
But then we become the bad guys because we're judging and punishing.
But with authority and righteousness, we'll have the laws of God written on our hearts as we go through into eternity.
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you was, supposedly at the very end we'll have all the wisdom that ever was, ever is, and ever will be. So what's missing? I mean, obviously we don't have it now, but what kind of knowledge are we not privy to at this point in time?
Yeah, and I think it's such an important question, because it's knowledge that, as the legends and the mythology goes and the mythos goes, is that we're going to become aware of this knowledge that they're going to bring out as we get closer to the last 7 years. And this is a world that used to operate, and I've talked about this in a lot of cases, and on shows and in this series, where I think that the technology was far superior just before the flood than what we have even to this day, but we're catching up on it, and that this angelic technology was provided or downloaded or encouraged to develop before the flood amongst the giants, and that Azazel is the one who provided most of the illicit knowledge, although you have other watchers that provided things according to the book of Enoch as well, but Azazel is the scapegoat for all the sins of the antediluvian world. And he taught the arts and crafts of all the war. And that this technology has, was at its pinnacle when the earth was about to be destroyed through these wars. The only way you destroy the earth through the wars is through fire. And so fire in terms of a destruction of how Sodom and Gomorrah would be destroyed. Fire as in nuclear weapons or even more powerful weapons that the gods likely had and used in their original rebellion against God, just as we get accounts of these wars in the Vedas, and that it was planet-destroying capability by fire. And just as 2 Peter 3 talks about, that there was this planet that was in the water and out of the water that was destroyed by fire in the beginning, and that this fire has been reserved for the end time, which we're starting to move into. And I think that's why God permitted or brought the flood, to ensure that the earth wasn't destroyed by fire, and that all the names in the book of life would have an opportunity to leave their names in that book of life and not have it blotted out. And so he's providing us that gift for everybody whose name was written in there from before creation to have that opportunity. So this knowledge is more advanced than what we have right now, or at least what they're showing us right now. And with the level of technology developing, the capacity to double that knowledge continues to shorten. And I don't know how fast it's doubling at this point in time, but you got to think it's starting to double like in less than a year or even shorter periods of time, because it just feeds on itself. And so this knowledge is going to be starting to be shown a little bit more to us, but it's going to be interdimensional capable. It has to have AI. That's why in the Davos and the G20 meeting last year, they were, pardon the expression, pissed, because the AI wasn't at the level to do the things that they wanted it to do, and it was holding up their whole global agenda and timetable, and they said to double down and get this thing in place. And so it's going to be interdimensional. It's going to be at a level that we can't even really understand at this point in time. It's going to include AI. It's going to include quantum computing. It's going to include cryptocurrency. It's going to including developing things at the quantum level and in multiple dimensions at the same time. It's going to include access to knowledge through the divine essence, as it's called in the New Age, and or through the Atman particle that they've been searching for, that is the source of this knowledge. That's an invisible particle that holds it, and through quantum entanglement shoots this knowledge to all dimensions instantaneously all the time. And that's what is wanting to be tapped into. So you have to have that type of technology to tap into that. And if they want us to line it up, as in all of the sort of science fiction with the alien shows, to sit around this galactic table, present it versus interdimensional, and unite against the evil Lord of the universe. I know I'm probably mixing a few different kinds of science fiction in here in terms of stories, but they're all directionally the same. That we have to have the technology and the weapons to convince ourselves that we could actually fight against the God of the universe in this rebellion and to win the freedom, and in this case the earth, where it would be a realm in itself on its own and without the oversight of God. So yeah, what is this knowledge? It's talked about in things like the pearls of wisdom, and just as Azazel is shown in Roslyn Castle hung upside down with this broken string of pearls. It's talked about as the Emerald Tablet. It's talked about as the Archives of the Masons. It's talked about as the Golden Apples. Anything that is this ancient treasure, it's talked about as the Shatia in Jewish mysticism. Anything that is talking about ancient knowledge and treasure is an allegory for this hidden knowledge. And as we've talked about on several shows that this knowledge was originally hidden, according to the Gnostics and the Polychronicon and their history, by Lamech or Enoch, because there's two versions of this, and underneath the Great Pyramid before the flood in 36,525 books stacked in 9 vaults. That was all of the ancient knowledge. And that it had the... Go ahead.
No, if they uncovered something like that, they would hold it back from the public for generations, trying to absorb it and use it and
not blow up the world.
Well, see, the biggest problem that I have with every invention that happens, no matter what it is, they try to turn it into a weapon.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, I'm sure that there are medical cures out there that we don't know about because they're holding them back because they want to decrease the population. So, you know, God forbid they save people's lives.
They call the accumulation of the knowledge as the absolute. And that absolute, it has the capability of destroying planets and dimensions as you extend some of the other thoughts that they would put in it, but for sure the Earth and the planet. So this knowledge, they've had it, or pieces of it, and it tends not to always be in one location, just as we know about Oak Island and Rosalind and a billion other legends of where all of this treasure is hidden. But their knowledge to be able to manage it has been limited since Babel, when it was brought to Nimrod to create Babel City, Babel Tower, and whatever else that tower was that had all of this angelic technology. You know, we've covered that off, and I think it was a portal, as in Babel, in Babalu, in Akkadian as Gateway of the Gods or Portal of the Gods. So this knowledge has been sort of dispersed and hidden and kept quiet, and trying to preserve it and trying to develop it and understand it with all of these wars going on, and they're never able to ever really sort of get it done. But they do know in the age of what they call the new age of the Fairies that this knowledge in their belief system in the new age will be omnipresent with us. And that this knowledge, you know, just as you have this treasure at the end of a rainbow in the fairy mythos. Well, the rainbow is the flood, and that's the preserved knowledge, not golden coins, but all of the technology and things. It's just everywhere in our imagery, and that the development of this is used through the 7 sacred sciences, guided by philosophy, which is a combination of the first 3 sciences, and that word philosophy means the love of Sophia. And Sophia is the mother goddess in Gnosticism. And this is the theology for the sciences that is designed to bring reason and discipline over the unbridled knowledge to control it. And that it is the theology of the gods of the pantheon that's driving to develop this and get us to a level where we can rebel and stand with them in the end time against the God of the universe. And we're going to see that we're going to see at least 2 battles in that sort of respect. One at the midpoint of the last 7 years when you have the war in heaven, and then at Armageddon. So depending on whether or not we're still alive at that point in time, that's what they're ultimately trying to bring about. And that the wars, the weapons of the war of both that midpoint, likely the war a year and a half before the midpoint with the Gog-Magog war in Ezekiel 38 and 39, Joel 1 and 2, and Revelation 9, all the same war, actually showing some of that technology and these hybrid creatures, both riders and horses that they're riding on, And I cover it off in detail in book 2. So if people want, and show you the columns on Joel 1 and 2 and Revelation 9, and show you how these are chimera beings, both the rider, probably an Oiketerian or a dwelling place for these giant spirits that are disembodied, that both come out of the pit prison along with the fallen angels, and the ones that have been wandering the earth to participate in the wars. This technology is going to be developed to a level that we can have weaponry that could take on the most powerful being that there is. And they're going to make that case that we can stand against them and win. But as we know from a monotheist perspective, understanding the polytheists obviously have a different outcome on this. We know who wins according to the book of Revelation.
It just seems wrong that our spiritual source has set us up to destroy each other.
No, he hasn't. No, he hasn't. We've all had free choice not to do this. The angels had free choice not to do the rebellion and then to bring on the revenges. Has given both immortal beings and immortal beings, intelligent beings, the ability to leave your name in the book of life or not. And in that process, we're the solution to that angelic rebellion, and they're convicting themselves and sifting humankind as we go through our age. But it's not God that brings this about. God would prefer it to be a different way. There could have been a different history if angels didn't rebel. There could be a different history if Adam and Eve would have followed the one law that they were provided.
Yeah.
If Israel would have held the Holy Covenant, we would have experienced history from there forward through the blessings of the covenant, not the curses of the covenant. If the people of Judea didn't reject the Messiah, we would have had a different. There's been opportunities all along the way. There was a restart to let this all start again and not do it the same way. But God has given us the gift, and he's letting it play out through free choice so that everyone who is going to be part of eternity clearly made their choice, God or not God.
Well, yes and no, because once this war is at an end, we have 1,000 years of peace, and then what happens?
Then we get the last humbling of humanity, where even in 1,000 years of peace, with interaction like the angels had with God and Jehovah and the Spirit, and seeing everything that was good when it was done in a good way and in a loyal way, Satan is released at the end of the millennium, and he's able to raise an army and march them from around the world against Jesus in Jerusalem. And it's to show humanity. You've had all of this history that you saw that happened when you don't do things in the ways of God and you rebel against God, and what happens on your own. And then you have 1,000 years where you have a comparative where everything is good. And yet we'll have descendants of Gog and Magog, which, we don't know exactly whether or not that's the same as the ones before the millennium, or it's an allegory for Gentiles. But there's people that are going to rebel, and just as the fallen angels did. So now humanity cannot say that we're not like angels, because for this period, we had that intimate knowledge and saw everything that was good. And we decided, a certain portion of the people decided to rebel or will rebel. And so it's that last sort of piece that needs to be done as we move into eternity, even though the ones who've already been resurrected, are raised higher because of our faith with little knowledge. and to be raised higher than the angels into eternity. This is that humbling aspect to say what has happened in the past is no different between you and the angels. So we have that with us as that history going forward into eternity. It's not an easy way, but God is Alpha Omega. He knew right from the beginning, if I want them to have free choice to choose me, this is going to happen. But I don't want people who are going to be underneath me who didn't want to be with me.
Well, it just seems that no matter what we do, we're going to be at war at some point in time.
Yes, and he has told us this from the beginning of human history.
That's really. I understand that ultimately there is a happy ending, but it appears to be millions of years in the future.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I didn't mention what happens, and people will say, well, did that really happen, or is it an allegory? Well, I think we understand the Bible literally, and Adam and Eve, their first two sons, and after what happened in Eden, you would think that, both would be loyal to God. But Cain ends up killing Abel. First two people born from Adam and Eve. One of them gets murdered, and then Cain gets ostracized, and he starts to, with his people and the people that he moves in with, he's leading them away from God. He becomes anti-God, and everything he is focused on is anti-God. He never forgives God for his punishment.
Wow. And he's still around, theoretically.
Theoretically, yeah.
Well, another question I have, the Templars and the Royals and the secret societies, they worship Azazel, not Satan. Why? Wouldn't it be more logical that they worship Satan?
They worship both.
Oh, okay.
And it's the hierarchy, as what we've talked about. So Azazel would have been the second in command, so to speak, in terms of the hierarchy next to Satan and whoever his consort was. And there was actually 7 Satans in the book of Enoch. The 7 wandering stars, as they're given to us in the New Testament, and the 7 days of the week, as they mix a few different pantheons to arrive at the same 7. Whether it's the Norse pantheon, Roman, and Greek pantheons are basically where they're pulled from. And that Satan is the one who sits above the council of the gods. So you have sort of Ha-Satan, or Satan, capitalized in the book of Enoch, then you have Satan's plural, and there's 7 of them. And so, again, that's part of the hierarchy as well. You also get the chief of 10s in the book of Enoch. And I kind of wonder whether or not that 10 in the 7 goes to the 70 nations within the hierarchy that rules over the 70 nations, of the earth. But Satan sits above all of that. So Satan would be not, as we're told that Satan is part of the 12 archons that Sophia created, that they also put God amongst. Satan would be more the nebulous in that scenario. At the heart of the meanings is the nebulous male force that copulates with Sophia, the female mother goddess, to create the 12 archons. And again, that's the allegory for just the setting up of the standard 12 parent gods around the world before the flood, and Satan and his consort. But I'm speculating he had a consort that's likely part of the allegory of the female Leviathan being killed in all accounts around the world, including the Bible. So, yes, they worship Azazel, but he's not the chief god of the pantheon.
Well, is Satan a title or an individual?
Both. So Satan actually means adversary in Hebrew. And so there's 7 adversaries and testers and tempters that are talked about in the book of Enoch. So Satan is the term that we use for Satan after his fall. And from a translated perspective, we don't get any names for Satan. But in Isaiah 14, where it says Lucifer, son of the morning, that is in Hebrew, in the original Hebrew, it is Hail El, son of the morning. And Hail El is a part of in this case, part of the morning star orders that are shown in the sons of God in Job 38, 4-7 at the time of the creation of the heavens and the earth. And Hail El goes back to a word, 2 different source words, Yel El and Hal El, both with A's in there in both of the consonants, both of the vowels in each of the 2 words. One is like a howling meaning, as in a jackal. And so something to do with a jackal-like entity of the fallen angels. I can't tell you which one howlings would be in the hierarchy of that's written in the Bible. Like Anubis would be a jackal god, a howling jackal god, or Nebaz biblically as it shows up as a barking. No, that's a barking god. Sorry. That would still be the same thing. And because we're not shown a description of an angel with a jackal or a dog face, but we have angels like Dunamis and Excusia and Icarus and others listed in the New Testament where we don't get a description for, like we get a description for the Ophanim, like we get a description for the archangels, that we get a description for the seraphim and a description for the cherubim. And typically also angels we get a description for too, the lowest order. So there could be a howling god in there, but the other one, it means, shining and proud and boastful. And so part of the shining, just as Satan masquerades as an angel of light, also means this great light. So Hail El Ben Shakar is the original Hebrew. So Hail El ends in El, and I think that would be his morning star name. And we also talked about Gadrael being in Eden, just as Ezekiel 28 shows Satan in the Garden of Eden, but in his cherubic aspect. He has natures of many different orders. And so Gadrael, meaning, wall of God, would be his cherubic name. In Jewish mysticism, in his seraphic or seraphim form, he would be, in serpent form, he would be, in dragon form, he would be named Samael. And so he has different names for different aspects and likely titles as well that he was awarded with. Now, we don't have 7. Like he would have had as a prince of this world, he was an archangel as well. So we're not sure we don't get a name for what his archangel name was. He was also a high priest, not just seraphim, but a high priest. And he may have even had a high priest name as well that were not provided. So he had many different responsibilities. He was completely unique, and he was the greatest angel created by the Word made flesh at the command of God, and Colossians 1 describes, and that he was, and he would have had several different names. So Satan is his degraded name and status, and we don't know exactly what he would have looked like. But he's also equated with a goat. Now, that could be what his degraded status might look like, as Azazel was, as a seraphim, degraded to goat god or satyr or satyr status.
So, so these are more like titles, or you know how the military have all those ribbons on their chest? It's like all these are ribbons on his chest at some point in time.
Yeah, and within the order, and as a high priest, he had 9 jewels, and the Levites had 12 on their vests, symbolizing a greater priest order that would be taken over by Jesus in the end time. And so, yes, these are titles, and just as the pharaohs, just as the kings in before the flood and after the flood, they would have multiple names for their different titles. So we don't know exactly what the original name was from any of them. So, like, when you have, Akhenaten, he's also named, Amenhotep. And I mean, they're not even close, right? There's not even one part that's with the other part. But what we do have is Amun as the chief god, and Aten is the one that he raises Aten over Amun in that pantheon during his reign. But it's representative of what they were positioned for as the divine representative of the gods on the earth. So yes, they would have 7 different titles and probably 7 different names, which again makes writing down and getting history right with one having up to, one pharaoh having up to 7 names. You multiply that over through the generations, and it's really difficult to start to get the chronology right.
Well, yeah, I mean, getting the genealogy right is almost impossible because they repeat. And again, there were so many names. Yeah. Why couldn't they be, why couldn't they be creative? Why did they have to take a name that was already there? Unless they assumed that the name would give them the power, which, might have been part of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is part of it. And everything they do in polytheism is to honor the pantheon of gods.
How do they know, the Templars and the Priory of Sion and the Royals, how do they know the direction and the purpose they're supposed to be going?
How did they know what they wanted to do?
Well, how do they know what their purpose is? I mean, okay, you take somebody who's of a bloodline, any pick one, and how do those individuals, how do they know what their purpose is for this lifetime in order to forward their bloodline?
Well, it's passed down through the families and the bloodlines, and they're all initiated in this knowledge all the way through. They know their roles in every generation. Every royale that's in a family from today all the way back into history, they had a specific function that they were assigned, and they were trained and initiated into that through childhood. So it was very much that oral tradition, and for the important things, they did write them down. And, they're worshiping the royales, the same pantheon of gods in every realm and country around the world. They just have different sort of vernacular names for it. So specifically with the Templars, they worshipped a god at the adept level, which shows you this interconnection, and that's Baphomet. And it's spelled Baphomet. And they had a head of this Baphomet. And it was the head and the skull of a goat god with horns. This stern, kern. And this is, a Celtic and Galatian tradition, and Scythian tradition, and an Indo-Aryan tradition. And Baphomet was rendered as the head or source of all of their wisdom and honored that way. So when we talked about Azazel being honored, they honored him because of the wisdom that he provided them and taught them all of the illicit knowledge. and that the Templars called him Agios Icaros, Baphomet. And what that means is holy, strong Baphomet. And one of the orders of angels that's listed in the book of Revelations is this mighty angel, which goes back to the Greek word Icarus. And Baphomet means it's two words from Indo-Aryan meaning, and it's Bapho Mitra or Mitra, and it means Father Mitra or Father Mithras, which is Lord Maitreya, as it comes out from the Eastern versions for the end time antichrist name as an allegory, and Lord Maitreya is the Indo-Aryan etymological transliterated name of Mithras, and the one who does the covenant. And so this tradition is with them all the way through. And Mithras was also identified as a dragon. Some people say Samael, and some people equate Azazel with Samael. I'll leave that for the polytheist to distinguish, but we do know that Azazel was originally a seraphim, and that the head dragon is a pendragon, just as we've talked about pendragons and overlords in previous shows. And of course, Mithras was the god of Mithraism in Rome, or Mithraism, but also the god of Zoroastrianism, which was the religion that was the religion of the Indo-Aryans that settled into Persia and produced the Achaemenid bloodline of kings, and also into the Indus Valley that produced the original religion of Hinduism and the Brahmin gods and pantheon, and is talking about the same gods. And we're I don't know how many different cultures that we've added in there, but this is an Indo-Aryan root, and understanding that the horn god, the goat god in this case, is the Hebrew is the Indo-Aryan word for Cern or Kern, Kern on the latter and Cern on the former, and it means a horn-headed god. You just can't make these connections up.
Well, how does someone of a bloodline, let's take, before she died, the Queen of England, who was head of a bloodline, head of the Church of England, how can she be both? I mean, as head of the church, she has responsibilities, but as head of a bloodline, she has responsibilities as well. And according to this, the bloodline would take precedence over the church.
It does. It always does. But that's the head of the church of a Christian religion versus the religion that they would worship in secret.
Gotcha.
So they've usurped the power, and throughout our history, all of the priests and ministers, even in Christianity, came from the nobility class.
Well, I find it fascinating that while Elizabeth and Philip were both bloodline, and certainly Charles and Anne, but apparently not Charles's brother. Not Charles's brother, sons. I don't know, are they, now Charles has two sons. Theoretically, they would both be bloodline, but not as strong as his. So would they be lower echelon?
Yes. And not likely eligible to succeed. So they would have to do some sort of intrigue to make a change there somehow, some way, if that were the case.
So you see how the bloodline thins out, because, Charles was married to Diana, who was not bloodline theoretically.
Yep. Well, actually, Diane has bloodlines that go back to the Stuarts, but not strong bloodlines but still nobility Stuart bloodlines.
Okay. I'm just, trying to figure out where it thins out.
But if you do have a line that thins out, then they start to, through generations, reintroduce stronger mixes of blood in. Now, it's still been thinned, but they keep their genealogies. They know where they fit. And what we also know is because they've had to intermarry with humans after the flood, it's been degrading all the way through. But still, they can make an assessment of the purity based on the known factors and why they keep their genealogies. I was just going to mention one other thing about Baphomet, which sort of connects in when we were talking about Khem, as being dark, and also goat. Baphomet is understood in the occult history of Baphomet as a kind of Khem Zoroaster. Zoroaster is the founder of Zoroastrianism, the Nephilim religion, and is also thought to be a Quinatar that is the allegorical lineage of Merovius, the founder of the Merovingian bloodline. And it's thought that the Quinatar is some sort of allegorical variation of Minotaur, which is a bull, and still could be of the bull angelic nature, but you also have the possibility that it may be of a satyr nature too.
But when it comes to, ruler of the one world order, that person is going to, I can't believe it's someone that will come from out of nowhere. If so, would it have to be a person of wealth, a person of power? What are we looking at here? It's not somebody that suddenly pulls a sword from a stone. Or maybe it is.
But even in the sword from the stone, it was of a bloodline. He was just displaced from childhood, right? So one suspects, at least if the Western Europeans get their way, and it's from their bloodlines, it'll be from the Royale bloodline. But we have to be careful because the Antichrist may not come from the European bloodlines. It could come from anywhere around the world, although from a biblical perspective, it could come from the former land area that Alexander had occupied in Greece and the four notable empires after that. So that narrows it down to a Mediterranean type of geography, but it includes, pretty much all of the Middle East as well, right? So in Rome, and so it's a big area. But out of that kingdom will come the Antichrist. So it could be from another religion, for all we know. But if we understand that the Jewish people are going to see him as being at least, partially Jewish, you would think, because they're going to recognize him as the Messiah. There has to be part of that. So that's Middle Eastern as well. But do expect that there will be bloodlines from all around the world that are rising up and are like Antichrist wannabes, just as Gog in the Gog War is understood, as you take that back, both in its Greek meaning in the New Testament and Hebrew, is being an end-time Antichrist type figure. And so one expects all of that suggests a pedigree, and that he'll present his pedigree. And if we don't think that that's not going to be the case, that he won't present a pedigree, then he can't really be the counterfeit Messiah he's got to counterfeit everything. So Jesus has a pedigree. Jesus has a genealogy that can be traced back to his time of birth, back to Adam. One would expect, as the replacement, as the one that comes before Antichrist, and the one that is the opposite and the false Messiah, Antichrist, will have his own pedigree that's going to astound people as well. So it's a complicated pedigree that hits the qualification, but the ones who come before him don't have to have that same kind of pedigree. They just have to have that Antichrist spirit in them that wants to sort of bring this about. And we're told there's going to be multiple Antichrists. And remember, Antichrist will require a so plausible Antichrist wannabe type figure that the true Antichrist will take credit for defeating that wannabe Antichrist in a war that counterfeits the Armageddon War. And again, I think that's the Gog-Magog War of Ezekiel 38, 39, Joel 1 and 2, and Revelation 9 as it's described in the Bible.
Won't they have to also demonstrate miracles and things like that as well?
Yes, Antichrist will receive the power of the dragon and the power of Satan. And if that's two different beings, and also you could take that as the power of the dragon empire that comes up out of the sea. But he will have all the power of Satan to do whatever he needs to do. And there's a connection from Antichrist to the one that comes up out of the abyss. And the one who is coming up out of the abyss is depicted in Revelation 9 as Abaddon and Apollyon, and he's the leader of these watchers that are coming out of the pit prison, along with the release of the terrible ones, the demonic spirits, also coming out at the same time. And Abaddon and Apollyon means destroyer in both Greek and in Hebrew, with the two, Abaddon being the Hebrew word and Apollyon being the Greek word. And that Antichrist is the one who's going to destroy Babylon. In Jeremiah 51 dual prophecy, it's this destroying wind and that is going to destroy Babylon, and the word there is Abad, and it's the root word for Abaddon. As in the title and the application there of what he does with that title. And I think Azazel is the chief of the watchers that is talked about in the book of Enoch as being that chief of the watchers who was sent to the pit prison along with the other watchers. But he's in the pit prison, and he's likely going to be Abaddon and Apollyon, and he's the destroyer of the Antediluvian world. He's the one who supplied this illicit knowledge that includes all of this technology, by speculation, obviously, on that, but that would have that fire-destroying scenario that required the flood to buy humankind a longer period of time to have all the names written in the Book of Life have that opportunity. And there's a connection between Antichrist and this Abaddon Apollyon, and we get that through Revelation 11, where it's the one who comes up out of the abyss who is going to kill the two witnesses at the midpoint of the last 7 years. So that means that pit prison would have to have opened before that, and I think up to a year and a half, maybe a little bit shorter before that. Also in Revelation 17, you have all of the 10 kings that are ruling with Babylon. They're going to give their power to Antichrist, and he's going to destroy Babylon. That's his first thing that he does after the the abomination in the temple. Destroys Babylon, then establishes the mark of the beast, and when you look at Antichrist's description in Revelation 17, where I'm pulling this information from, and Revelation 14, where you get the sequence of events of the midpoint and the last 3.5 years, you have this connection that Antichrist is the one who once was, now is not, but will be again. So at the time of the writing of Revelation, the one that once was now is not, but will be again. This is talking about an antichrist figure that was sometime before, probably before the flood, and is not there at the time of John, but will be in the time of the end. And this is the one that who once was, now is not, but what will be again, who comes up out of the abyss, prison. So there's this connection. And thus, Antichrist is called the son of perdition, which goes back to a series of Greek words that includes, out of extension, Apollyon. So I think there's another connection in there, just as Daniel 11 is talking about honoring a god of forces in the last 3.5 years, which is likely Azazel as well.
Well, just so I can make sure my travel plans are, where is Babylon? Because I want to avoid it.
Well, everybody has a theory on it, and some people will say New York City, some people will say the United States, and there's a 1,000 different versions. I come about it a little differently. I know Babylon is a geopolitical organization because it controls the 10 kings with the reins, and the 10 kings grow jealous of her wealth, and they give their power to Antichrist to overthrow Babylon. So it's a geopolitical organization. She sits on many waters as this allegorical, mystical religion, as Revelation 17 talks about. So it's a universal religion that sits on all the waters, or the people, or the Gentile nations. And that all the language to describe the woman is language that is pulled right out of the Old Testament for polytheist religions. And that we know it is also a giant economic organization that controls all trade, just as she's described in Revelation 18, and why the 10 kings grow so jealous of all the wealth that she gains through this. So she's going to take a skim or a tribute or a piece of every transaction that happens in the world, likely through this system that's being developed that Antichrist will take over at the midpoint of the last 7 years for the beast system, the mark of the beast. And it is a city. And how do we know Babylon is a city? It is said 9 times in the book of Revelation that it's a city. So it's a city. And Babel is the root word out of Hebrew that is used for Babylon in the New Testament. And Babel is the religion Hermes inherited, that Nimrod inherited from Hermes, who found all of the knowledge after the flood, and the religious aspect, brought it to Nimrod at Babel. And this is the Enochian mysticism of Atlantis and of the Antediluvian world that was part of the whole organizational structure throughout the world. And just as this polytheist daughter of Babylon was part of the whole organizational structure of all of the beast kingdoms and all of the ruling polytheist governments around the world throughout our history, it will come back again in the time of Babylon. So Babylon is all of those 4 things, and we need to sort of understand it in each of its distinct descriptions, but it is one entity. So it's a religion, it's a city, it's an economical organization, and it's a geopolitical organization.
Okay.
And I think to answer the question, I think the city is Rome, on the ancient 7 hills of the Indo-Aryan Etruscan settlement, and the head was the chief of the 7 hills was Palatine Hill. This is the city of Romulus and Remus, and of the offspring of Ares, the war god, and Azazel would be the war god. So as you look at the connections, that all seems to sort of match up. And so I think that's going to be the city. And it also was understood as an allegory. Babylon was understood as an allegory for the city of Rome in the time of the Essenes, in the time of Jesus, in the time of John of Patmos writing or recording the Revelation mode. Everything points to the city of Rome, not necessarily as the Catholic, as the core to this religion because it's going to be the old Enochian mysticism that we know as Babylon throughout our history of the polytheist religions and beast religions. It's going to be back but centered on the 7 hills, just as that's where she is said to sit in Revelation 17. Not to be confused with the 7 kings of the beast empires.
You keep referring to it as she. Why?
Because that's how she's referred to as in the book of Revelation and as a mother goddess.
So
this is the mother goddess aspect that's coming back in the end time, just as the mother goddess was a core component of the polytheist religion. You have the patriarchal and the matriarchal side, and that's coming back in its full array and glory as it once was of old.
Well, if you look at Rome and Catholicism today, there's no room for women or a feminine anything. And as far as being a center for economic anything, I mean, a lot is going to have to change before that occurs.
Yes. And not only within the religion, which the current pope is working to move in that direction, but it's why no matter how much it changes, and maybe it's part of the coming of the polytheist religion, but at the end of the day, Vaticanus Hill is not Palatine Hill. It's not part of the 7. It was a branch of the Palatine Sibylline mother goddess prophecies that was located at Babylon or at Palatine Hill. So I think it's going to be in the religion, but not the dominant role. It's going to be the old religion, but it's going to be a key catalyst that's going to bring it about. And as you say, Rome isn't an economic capital, so a lot has to change. But with the false prophets that come, they'll make those changes.
Well, where they are building this new temple, and I keep calling it Dubai, and it's not Dubai, but it's
Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, that has the great richness that I could see would become, a center for power.
Yeah, it certainly will be. I think it's one of the steps on the way to get to where we're going. And we may have at decentralized locations. You may have in the 10 empires a holy city as well, because that would be the typical setup as well. But you would have the central branch in one location. Trouble with Abu Dhabi, it's not on 7 mountains or 7 hills. So from a Christian perspective, rules it out. But from people who aren't trying to bring about Christian prophecy, they want to do it in their own way. And before, they'll probably make an attempt at other places. And again, sort of confuse people on the time frame and the events that are coming. So there's going to be a lot of misdirection as we get closer to the last 7 years.
It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think I have to kind of thank you too, because your book has definitely brought Atlantis back into my frame of references as being more than just a myth. Your connections with Atlantis are just so amazing. You have to sit back and say, wait a minute, it had to have existed for all of these references, if nothing else.
Yeah.
But their influence and their example and what they brought into the story that you have woven so beautifully here, with the help of a lot of other books. But it makes more sense now. But I think so many of us have not understood how long this timetable is. It's not 600 years or 6,000 years. It's so many more thousands of years old than we can conceive of.
Yeah, it very well is much older than what we can conceive. We're seeing, kind of the last chapters of it, I think. So it'll be interesting to hopefully at some point in time in this world or the other world that, we'll learn some of the, get more information on it so that we can sort of better understand it. But I think we can understand it better now than so many generations before us in humankind's history, because we have some things that have made it through in terms of prehistorical surviving of records and accountings of what happened before the flood and of what happened shortly after the flood. It's murky, but we've seen so much that we have a clearer picture now than generations before us. Probably all the generations before us.
Oh, yeah, I would say so. I mean, so many people want to have, written evidence and stuff like that. And when you talk about the treasures of the Templars, I mean, it has to be knowledge. It can't possibly just be gold. That doesn't make sense to me. It has to be wisdom of some sort. And, I hold out hope that there will be archaeological digs that will find, the 9 different chambers that hold the materials, the wisdom, the knowledge. It's not all of it, but, certainly the pillars are no longer with us, so we have to go someplace.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And for the most part, the purists in polytheism say, the true treasure is always knowledge. And it's not to discount the value of having money and gold, but what they truly valued was the knowledge, and that's what they cherished. They have to have the money to stay in control, so that's important too. But the knowledge is the source of their reason for being. Polytheism is a knowledge cult, a knowledge of the development of the 7 sacred sciences that merged with the knowledge from the gods that took us to a technology in the world that we've not seen since. And we're getting close, but we're not there yet. So that knowledge is ultimately more powerful, and it's the knowledge for them that will help them become gods in the physical world.
Yeah, that's the scary part, because, once you build a pedestal and climb on it, the only thing left to do is to fall off of it.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to see that knowledge in the end time, and it's going to be on full display. And as I say, the only way we can even begin to imagine what is coming is to understand what happened in prehistory before the flood, and other examples. Not that it got to the same peak after the flood, because it most certainly did not, but in the first 100 years or so, it was getting close to the same point, and thus the confusion of the languages at Babel. So we need to understand this so we can have a better understanding what is coming at us, because when we have the gods walking amongst us again, when we have all of these demonic creatures and Oiketerians created for these demonic, Oiketerian, for people who aren't familiar with that, that's a soul and a body, which is the dwelling place for a spirit, which is the meaning of Oiketerian, and it comes out of Jude 1:6 for habitation in heaven, and house in heaven in 2 Corinthians 5:2. Only 2 times Oiketerian is used. There's derivatives used for similar purposes, but that specific meaning is the dwelling place for a spirit. So it's important to get this information out so that people who are recognizing something's not quite right in the world can start digging into things a little bit more, because we have to wake people up. And we don't have to just sort of be sheep that are going to be cattle herded into globalization. We can push this off for a while. Once you centralize power, you create for that absolute power to be absolutely corrupted, and it will happen. So we need to be decentralized, because we always use the knowledge for evil. It can be used for good or evil, but it ends up always being used for evil. So those two things that we're sort of flying at breakneck speed to bring about, and what the globalists are actively working about to bring about, is not going to be utopia. It's going to be a dystopia, and it does not end well. So.
No, well, so many need to have absolute proof. Give me a Dead Sea Scroll, or give, that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm looking for. That's why I'm following so closely a lot of the archaeological stuff going on, because in order to sway great numbers, you're going to need something that is undeniable. So. Yep. Not somebody walking on water, but maybe that too. Who knows? So far I'm really good so long as it's frozen. But
Jesus said in his parable that even if somebody did come back from the dead and tell them about what hell looks like, nobody would believe them.
Yeah, that's true. I just noticed our time. We are finally at the end of this, and I still am looking forward to the next book. I really am. This has been such a pleasure and a joy to sit with you through 8 sections here and 7 sections in the first book. So, right on.
Terrific. And I have an announcement on the book 2. It is out on digital with Kindle, and it is in the written format. And I have a website you can go to get either book, and link over for the Kindle at the Genesis6conspiracy.com, the Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. And you can also get the Audible version in book 1. And as of sometime this week, you will have the Audible version for Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, how understanding prehistory and giants helps to define end-time prophecy. And that will be out on Amazon Audible and iTunes later this week. So very happy for that, and I'll be getting links up onto the website. I already sent the email off on the weekend to get it all updated before the end of the year, and I'm hoping it'll be done. And when that new website is done, I'll have all the 8 sections of this series and the 7 sections of book 2 up on that website as well, so that people can click on that to listen to it if they're going to the website. So you'll have a generous excerpt of each chapter of each book. You'll have the Kindle edition link, you'll have the Audible edition link, and then you'll have 15 shows that you and I have gone through between last spring and this fall on book 1 and book 2 to help people decide, is that the book for me or not? Lots of information there.
Well, what you've got is an amazing college course that is just phenomenal here. And I would imagine at some point in time it will become one, because it's absolutely mind-boggling, the material here, and I can't wait for book 3. When's that going to be done?
Well, I'm still so heavily out there, getting the Audible books reviewed and done. It's a ways away yet. I before the book 2 came out, I got up to on the rewrite 10 chapters of it. So I know what I want to do, but I need to be able to spend quality time. So probably after about another 6 months, I can really start taking some time to write that new book. But right now, schedule is basically full. So,
Well, thank you so very much for sharing your wisdom and your book and your knowledge with us. And we'll have you back again to review certain different areas of it. I'm sure between Mark and I, we'll have you back within the next couple of months. So thank you, Gary, so much for all of this.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and hopefully we've, in our conversations, have connected some dots to sort of help make sense of the world and, where we came from, what's going on today, and maybe get you curious as to, about knowing all of that, how we know what we can look forward to in the future. So it's been my humble pleasure to be able to do these 2 series with you, Barbara.
Oh, it's been a pleasure for me too. And So good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. This will be up on YouTube tomorrow. And keep checking back with us because, there's always going to be magic happening here of one sort or another. And Mark has a show tomorrow night, so do check up on that one too. Good night, everybody.